is Getting Answers, Western Mass News.
Good Sunday morning. I hope you're having a very good weekend. Happy Mother's Day, too. Welcome to Getting Answers, where each week we focus on issues and events in Western Massachusetts and across the country with the newsmakers and the people who are making a difference. The 2026 Farm Bill is our focus today. That bill was passed by the House last week. It significantly will impact SNAP by implementing about $187 billion in cuts, restricting eligibility and expanding work requirements. The bill introduces stricter rules, including a permanent ban on EBT processing fees and potential restrictions on using benefits for sugary drinks while aiming to transition to EBT chip cards. That is just scratching the surface. The question is, what does this mean for people here in Western Massachusetts? Well, for some answers on that, I'm joined by Christina Maxwell, the Director of Programs for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Kind of a trying time, a troubling time, a lot of uncertainty.
There's a lot of uncertainty, and it's a very troubling time for people who are struggling to get food.
When this was passed by the House last week, the Food Bank released a statement about the passage, expressing disappointment and concern about what it addresses, or more so what it fails to address. What are those concerns?
So last summer, the legislature passed and President Trump signed H.R. 1, which was a bill that really radically cut SNAP benefits and changed the program in ways that it has not been changed before in its 1-century history almost. And we were really needing this farm bill to reverse some of those changes. And unfortunately, that did not happen in the House version of the bill. So we're turning our attention to the Senate and hoping that they'll be able to include some provisions that will roll back those cuts.
To kind of put things in perspective, compare what the differences are in the SNAP benefit program, say now, as to what they may have been 10 years ago.
So most of the changes between 10 years ago and now are these cuts that were implemented recently, which limit the eligibility of various groups of people. So legally permanent or legally present immigrants, for example, are no longer eligible for SNAP for the most part. So these are people who have faced domestic violence, human trafficking, they're asylees, and in most cases they are no longer eligible for SNAP anymore. Even
though they're here legally?
Correct.
Yeah.
And you know, people who are not here legally have never been eligible for SNAP, and they're still not. So that hasn't changed. But I would say maybe the biggest change that we're seeing right now is newly implemented timelines on SNAP, which are called work requirements, but are really paperwork requirements in reality. So SNAP has always included work requirements for people who get SNAP benefits, but those requirements were expanded to larger groups of people, including homeless individuals, vets, kids aging out of foster care. Those are some of the groups that used to be exempt from these requirements and now are required to be doing some work in order to get SNAP benefits. And they have to be working a certain number of hours. In Western Massachusetts, it's a real challenge with a small labor market, transportation challenges to get to jobs. There's a list of issues. But on top of those changes that individual recipients are going to see, the cost of administering SNAP benefits is going to largely shift onto the state. It has historically been divided equally between the federal government and the state government. And now the state government will have to pay 75% of the administrative costs starting this coming October. And the following October, the states will have to start paying some of the benefits, which has never happened before in the history of the program. The federal government has always paid 100% of those benefits, and now the states will have to pick that up. And across the country, that's billions and billions of dollars that are being put onto the states, onto budgets that cannot possibly bear that
And this
expense.
is with no help from the federal government at all.
Right, correct. They're taking the funding away.
So the federal government's just backing away from this
Exactly.
thing completely.
Yeah.
Well, the sad thing about this, too, is you're talking about people who really need the help of SNAP benefits, but it's just being taken away.
Exactly. And, sometimes there's this fallacy that SNAP benefits are a luxury.
Yeah.
And, that people are sort of gaming the system. SNAP benefits don't go very far. It's, a couple of dollars per meal per person. So nobody's on SNAP benefits because they want to be.
Sure.
They're on them because they need to be for whatever reason. There are a myriad of reasons that people don't have enough money in their pockets to be able to buy enough food for themselves and their families. And historically, the federal government has always seen it as part of their responsibility to take care of its people.
Sure.
And this is one of those ways, and it's really backing away from that obligation.
And you see what we're going through today, too. Never mind what SNAP benefits provide, but all right, other expenses. All of a sudden, within the last 2 months, we're paying ridiculous amounts of money for a gallon of gasoline.
Right.
I mean, so that has to come from somewhere.
Exactly. And you add in housing costs, like you said, transportation costs, childcare costs are extremely burdensome for families with kids. The cost of living is really extraordinary these days, and even people who have in the past been able to completely support themselves now just can't because things are so expensive. They just can't pay for it all.
The legislation, I know, it includes about $187 billion in cuts to benefits over the 10 years. So I'm sure you're in touch with our legislative leaders, Congressman Neal, Congressman McGovern too. What are you hearing about the chances of this passing in the Senate? Or do you expect to see any changes made?
Well, we're certainly hoping to see some changes made. The Senate is, I don't have a lot of inside information about what's going to happen in the Senate, but I think passage is somewhat less likely there. The House did have a hard time getting it passed. There was some infighting in the Republican Party over it. I think it'll have a harder time in the Senate, and they do have to reach the supermajority of 60 votes, which makes it harder. But it could well pass. We just hope that these cuts are rolled back because it's really the only way to save this program.
So, yeah, I guess the thought about that is depending on what happens in the fall midterm elections, who takes control of the House and Senate will determine what the future is going to be.
Right, yep, they could definitely change things again.
More than anything else. And we mentioned about the SNAP benefits going to the states. And you look at the responsibility of the state. I mean, Massachusetts is struggling as it is, even just to help cities and towns. Never mind having this burden on it. Where's this going to come from is the big question.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think our governor and our legislature have some incredibly hard choices to make in the next several years because, if you're going to be paying SNAP benefits, you're going to have to get that money from somewhere, like you said. So does that come from other very worthy programs? Does it come out of housing? Does it come out of education? Does it come out of money for roads and bridges? So they're really going to have to make some tough choices. And this is a burden that there's no state in the country who can afford this. So every state's going to really struggle with this.
Well, the uncertainty, too, for the people who are on SNAP benefits, they're hearing all of this come out. The anxiety they must be suffering through, it's got to be bad enough as it is.
Right.
Now this uncertainty with, am I going to lose my benefits completely?
Absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of confusion in the public about this. Some people haven't heard about it at all. Some people have heard about it, but they don't understand they don't know the details. The new requirements are very confusing in and of themselves. And they're hard to talk about because they're sort of different for each person. For example, the number of hours a person is required to work varies by person. So it's hard to sort of say, for everybody, this is the new rule. It's tough to communicate about. So people are confused and they're scared. Even if they don't know the details, they know things are getting worse. And that's terrifying. If you're not able to put food on the table for yourself or your kids, that's just a horrible feeling. So, one of the challenges that we're seeing with this right now is that the new paperwork requirements are putting such a burden on the Department of Transitional Assistance, which is the state agency that operates SNAP, that they are woefully understaffed and aren't able to respond to the increase in calls that they're getting. So in March, they hung up on 81% of the phone calls, into their service center, which means people who are trying to ask questions or report their work hours or report other changes aren't able to do so. So these are people who are trying to follow these new rules, and they literally can't because nobody will pick up the phone. And you know, the staff at DTA, they're great, they're very hardworking, they're doing everything they can, there just aren't enough of them. So we really need the legislature to put some additional funding in that budget for next year so that they can hire about 200 more workers to accommodate this level of work.
And it sounds to, from what I've read on this new legislation, this isn't cutting fat or waste. These are just flat out cuts.
Absolutely.
You figure out how to cut, what to cut, and how to cut.
Exactly, yes. There's very little waste and fraud in the SNAP program, contrary to what some people would have us all believe. You know, the fraud rate within SNAP is really very minuscule. So that's not what's being cut here. This is simply like, you're getting $100 of SNAP a month now, we're going to cut that down to 25. You know.
And that's it.
Yeah, and some people are finding out that their benefits have been cut when they're standing in line at the grocery store trying to pay, which is
so you had embarrassment.
humiliating. Yeah. And that's not how anybody should find out about something like that.
Not at all. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, Christine and I are going to talk about what happens to people here in Western Massachusetts who rely on food assistance in that farm bill, if this, in its current state, if that does pass in the Senate. Stay with us. Welcome back to Getting Answers on this Sunday. Happy Mother's Day, by the way. My guest this week is Christina Maxwell. She is the Director of Programs for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. Christina, we kind of touched on this, what happens if the Farm Bill passes the Senate and then it is signed by President Trump. What's it going to mean for people in this area who rely on food assistance, and especially on the Food Bank of Western Mass?
Yeah, so the food bank and our network of food pantries and meal sites is already operating at a very high level. We're busy. So we are serving now about 120,000 people every month.
Every month? Every month,
who come into one of our pantries or meal sites for food. That's up significantly since before the pandemic. It fell a little bit after the pandemic and then rose again pretty quickly with inflation that kicked in so quickly thereafter. And now it's just rising again, and it's going to continue to rise as these cuts roll out each month. So, you know, we're just not sure where the end is there, where, you know, what's the top number of people that we're going to be serving. But to be very clear about this, we cannot fill the gap of SNAP benefits. When those benefits are cut, we can't step into that hole. We can fill a little part of it, but it's only a little part. Charity just simply can't do it. For every meal or meal equivalent that the food bank distributes, SNAP provides 9 meals. So that's a huge difference. And some people think, you know, charity will step in and fill this hole if the federal government doesn't do it, and that's just not the case. So people are going to struggle. We're going to do the very best we can to provide as much food as we can to as many people who need it, but the fact of the matter is that we won't be able to do that for everybody.
I guess the other question is okay, if you can't, and I mean, you've been here for so many people for so many years, where do they go?
Right.
And there really is nowhere else to go, is there?
That is the question, yeah. No, there really isn't. I mean, it's a terrible situation that people are going to be facing, and I don't know the answer to where do people go. I mean, I hope they'll go to our food pantries and our meal sites who will do their level best to help folks.
But they're in the same dilemma you do,
But they're in the same dilemma that we are. You know, they just simply won't be able to. There's not enough food for us to be able to help everybody.
We're talking to not just people who are not working, or we're talking the working poor.
Absolutely. And in a lot of cases, people have 2 or even 3 jobs that they're juggling. You know, they don't get enough hours at one job, so they have to work 2 or 3. And, you know, both parents working, sometimes teenagers are working. Like, these are working people who simply aren't making enough money to make ends meet, given the exploding costs that we're all witnessing right now.
So as you look at the overall, and this is probably a hard number to categorize, but the overall impact on these SNAP benefit cuts will make in Western Massachusetts, I mean, it could be devastating.
It could be devastating. SNAP benefits alone bring in $39 million to Western Massachusetts every month.
39 million.
$39 million every month. So that's money that goes to individuals and families, but it also goes to farmers who grow the food and retailers who own the stores where people go to spend their SNAP dollars. So this is something that's going to affect everybody, regardless of whether or not they get SNAP benefits.
I know one of the things we were talking about before we went on the air, because I asked you, I said, what is the SNAP program doing under the Farm Bill? But there's a good reason why, and that's part of it, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. When the Farm Bill was first created, they kind of married SNAP and the farm assistance part of it together so that they could get urban legislators and rural legislators both on board to pass this bill, because there was kind of something in it for everybody. And that's the way it's historically been. These two seemingly disparate constituencies really depend on each other.
Yeah.
Farmers need somebody to buy their food, and people need somebody to grow their food. So it's a very symbiotic relationship, and what this current version of the bill is doing is ripping that relationship apart, and it's not sustainable.
I can't imagine what it's like for folks who are relying on SNAP benefits to have this uncertainty. Well, where am I going to be compared now, the middle of the year, to the end of the year? I mean, it could be, this is life-changing.
This is life-changing, for sure, yep. And what's happening is the new requirements are being rolled out, in Massachusetts at least, 1 month at a time.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen the full effect of the cuts yet on individual people. By the end of this current year, everybody will be subject to the new paperwork requirements and time limits. So by then we'll have a somewhat better idea of what we're facing, but that's exactly when the cost shift is going to start to move a lot of the costs onto the state. So that's going to affect people in a different way statewide.
And the other part of that too is you can't do any long-term planning. I mean, you're basically going month to month, aren't you?
Right.
With that uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah, and people are really scrambling trying to fill these new requirements.
Sure.
And, you know, they're having a terrible time of it, like I said, because the labor market in Western Mass is relatively small.
Yep.
Transportation is hard. If you live in a rural area, it's very hard to get around if you don't have a car, or if you can't afford to put gas in your car.
Right. Well,
Right? It's hard to get to a job if you can't get to a job.
Yeah.
So people who are really trying to do the right thing and play by the rules are having a terrible time doing it.
yeah. All right, we're taking another break. When we come back, we'll talk more about how the Food Bank of Western Mass has dealt with the SNAP benefit cuts in the past. Stay with us. Welcome back to Western Mass News Getting Answers. In our last segment with Christina Maxwell, the Director of Programs for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. Christina, in the first segment, we talked about the cuts, the SNAP benefit cuts that were hit in 2025, and stricter eligibility due to those federal changes. What were some of those changes? And as you look at those changes and what's happening now, it just adds fuel to the fire, doesn't it?
Right. So the changes that happen in 2025 are really being funded now through this new Farm Bill. Like they're connected to each other. So what we were really needing to have happen was for this Farm Bill to rescind some of those earlier changes that happened last summer.
Not even close. Right?
Not even close in the House version. So we're really relying on the Senate to come through and see what a serious problem this is creating for people, for state budgets, you know, for retailers, for farmers, for people who need help getting food, for everybody. It's an enormous problem, and we're really hoping that the Senate will see that and see fit to roll these changes back.
The fact is, this is going to, even if we're not on SNAP benefits, this is going to affect all of us in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. The state's going to need to pay millions and millions and millions of dollars to administer the SNAP program, and that money has to come from somewhere. So either they need to raise taxes or they need to cut other programs.
Sure.
And that could be education funding, it could be funding for roads and bridges, it could be any number of things, and we'll all feel the results of that.
So obviously people, you're going to be looking at the private sector and individuals for more help. I mean, they give, in Western Mass, we know how much they give already. You know, you have the Will Bike for food and everything else, but do you have to look at more fundraisers and things like this to try to bring more money in to cover the need?
We do. We're buying more food now than we've ever need to buy before, and that's going to continue. So we're going to be asking our community to step up yet again. The Western Mass community is extremely generous and very supportive, and we're so grateful for that. But we're really going to need their help to get through this time.
So if someone wants to help, if they want to make a donation or just to get more information, what should they do?
They can go to our website. It's foodbankwma.org, and they can learn about how to give a donation or participate in a fundraiser or advocate on behalf of some of these policies. We would welcome any of that.
Pick up the phone and call our representatives.
Absolutely.
Christina, thank you. Good to see you again. We'll have you back because I don't think things are going to get any better anytime soon. There's more to talk about.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Christina Maxwell, who's the Director of Programs for the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. My thanks to her and my thanks to you for watching. I'm Dave Mattson. Again, happy Mother's Day. We'll see you next week.